Hey guys, welcome back to the CNC Auto channel. I'm your friendly neighborhood mechanic. Have you found yourself needing to do a timing chain or a water pump on one of these Ford, Lincoln, Mazda 3.5, 3.7 engines? If you have, you know that it is a big job and there are a lot of little nuances to that job. Well, in this episode, I'm going to show you all the tips and tricks from every video out there and my own personal experience on how to do this job faster, easier, and save you a bunch of time and a bunch of money. So come on, let's get into it. So again, this video is a compilation of tips and tricks. I'm not going to go through step by step every little part of this job of replacing the water pump or timing set on one of these engines. But what I am going to show you is all of the little places where you might get caught up or places where you can save a bunch of time and money and headaches. So come on, we're going to go through here. And the way that this is formatted, it's going to have lots of detailed pictures, and I'm going to put some text on the screen, and I'm going to talk through it. And hopefully, well, not hopefully, I know by the time you get done watching this video, you're going to have learned something about how to make this job easier on you and save you a ton of time. So come on, enjoy. And if I forgot something or if you can add some additional tips for the audience, man, please do so. Leave us a comment down below. And if you don't mind, if you like this sort of thing, please subscribe. Appreciate you guys. Let's get into it.
In case you're wondering, how do you know if the water pump is bad on one of these engines? It'll start leaking coolant from this area here, and it'll run down off of the air conditioning compressor sometimes in this area, this hole, and then down along the front of the oil pan as shown in this picture. I highly recommend taking lots and lots of pictures, all kinds of different angles, and all the way along the way as well. That way that you will have something to refer back to see where the wire used to connect, or if something was broken and you want to see if that was the case before you even started working in there. It'll be really helpful. One of the most important things to remember is to reconnect these ground straps as I point to here. And anything in your project that you need to take pictures of, make sure you point your finger to those things that you really want to remember. These ground straps, if you forget to reconnect them, they can cause all kinds of weird electrical gremlins. So keep an eye on these. One of the things you don't want to forget, and is often the case, ask me how I know, right, is to remove the dipstick before you try to remove the valve cover on the left or the front side of the engine. That thing will be, going through the head, through the valve cover, obviously, and then way down into the engine. So as you start to pull that valve cover off, it'll just kind of tangle itself up, and you'll think something really bad's going on, but it's no big deal. One really good tip is anytime you take apart some connections, wires, or if there's something that you really want to remember to put back together, flag that with some really bright colored tape, or I've even heard people using some bright colored zip ties. But anything that you will notice as you go to put this thing back together, hey, there's something that I forgot to put right there. That green tape in this case will really shine. And also, if you have to open up the engine in any way, like here we take the intake manifold off the top of the engine, there's passages that if you drop something down inside could really damage the engine. So go ahead and tape over those so that you never have any issues with that. On this Ford 3.5, 3.7, you can just undo all the wires, and then you can just pull them to the driver's side out of the way of the valve covers. You don't have to completely remove the wiring harness or anything like that. If you need to, you can use some bungee cords or something like that to hold the wires forcefully out of the way. That way they don't get in your way whenever you're trying to take the valve covers off or put them back, and none of those connectors can get tangled up in the camshafts while you're rotating the engine. You can get to that front of the engine here through the passenger wheel well. You just got to remove the plastic inner liner. There's a few clips, a few screws that hold it in place, and you really only have to remove the front half of it. Once you get the front half of it loose, you can pull it back and then tuck it back here like I show behind the rotor. And then you've got free and clear access to the front of the engine where you can get to the crankshaft pulley, as you see here, the harmonic balancer, take off the serpentine belts, and of course do the timing set and water pump. The only thing that you really need to remove from the front of the engine is this motor mount here. It's bolted on with a few bolts, and then it goes down onto these studs, and I'll show you that here in a little bit more detail in a second. But once you remove that motor mount, the engine's not going to be supported on that end, so it's a good idea to put a jack with a piece of wood on top of that jack pad to right underneath the oil pan. That'll support the weight of the engine and allow you to jack it up and down as you need to. And that also helps in getting some of the bolts out of the timing cover. To get the harmonic balancer or the crank pulley out of the way, you're going to need a puller of some kind. I find that this type works better than the regular 3-jaw pullers because it holds on to the crank pulley a little bit better without slipping off. If you do end up getting this one, I've got a link in the description, and you'll use the second to the shortest rod, which goes down into the hole where you've removed the crank bolt. And that's how it drives out, and it doesn't interfere with the threads of the where the bolt goes or anything like that. Really slick. And as a bonus, this thing works not only on these Ford engines, but it also works on those LS series engines from Chevrolet. So these are the studs that the front motor mount goes down over. Once you remove the nuts and then slide that motor mount up and out of the way, there will be these 4 studs sticking up here in the front of the motor. And they can be in the way of getting to those bolts right behind them that are holding the top center of the timing cover in place. So if you want to remove these, you'll need one of those funky star-shaped bits. They call it an E8 socket. That's the size E8. So that is really helpful to remove those. Then you can get your socket on these bolts, and also it's really easy to get them back in later. So now you're ready to take all the bolts off of the front of the timing cover, and these diagrams show you where they're located. The one that always tricks people is because it's kind of hidden under there is number 26 that I've circled here. It's a small 8mm headed bolt, and it's really long, but it's still a small bolt, and it's tucked up underneath this part of the timing cover. And if you forget that thing, you won't be able to pull this timing cover off. And I've seen and heard of people breaking these timing covers or that bolt off trying to pry these things. So don't forget that bolt. All right, now that the timing cover's out of the way, you can see your timing set here. You're going to want to rotate the engine over before you take the timing chains off of it. And so you can do that by putting the crank bolt back in where it was, and you can use an impact to tighten that thing up just a little bit. Don't go gorilla crazy with the tightness on this thing. It's just to snug it up. And then you can put a regular giant socket or wrench or whatever on it and turn it by hand. Now, it'll be kind of hard to turn by hand very far if you keep the spark plugs in it, because it will try to build up compression. So go ahead and just remove the spark plugs or loosen them up or something like that. Makes it a lot easier. But you're going to want to orient the timing marks that are on the sprockets, not the timing marks on the chain. So the sprocket, in this picture, they're painted yellow. You're going to want to orient them like shown here with these red arrows. There's lots of different videos and resources that you can use in order to see that more clearly. I just wanted to show you a few tips here. Once you have the timing marks in the right place, the camshafts have flat spots on the front of them up here near the front of the engine. And so you can remove this little oil tube, and they sell these cam holding tools which slide down over those flat spots as I show in the picture on the right. A lot of people say you don't need the tool, and that may be true, but it does seem to make it easier to hold the camshafts in place, especially if you're going to remove the secondary chains or the phasers and then have to tighten them back down, because you have to put a lot of torque on those bolts, and these camshafts will want to move on you. So here's another view of the camshaft holding tool in place. And here's a pro tip for you. Um, if the camshaft holding tool won't slide down over the flats of the camshaft, and it happens a lot because the camshaft, especially with a stretched chain, may be just slightly off, you can rotate these camshafts with a wrench. There's a hex feature on the camshaft about halfway down it. You can rotate that with a wrench just a little bit so that this cam tool will slide down, and then its ears will sit flush against the part of the head where the valve cover mates up to it. Another little tip is you can take the bolt that was used to hold that U-shaped tube, the oil tube that you removed. You can take one of those bolts and sort of wedge it in at an angle like this, and it'll hold your camshaft holding tool in place and keep it from flopping around. And that's a really frustrating thing. So good tip here. Because those camshaft holding tools can move around, and it takes a whole lot of torque to tighten up the cam phaser bolts, I find it easier to, in addition to using the camshaft holding tools, use some vice grips or a big wrench. The size of wrench that you'll need for those hex features where I've got the vice grips here is 1 1/16 of an inch. And that'll help you to hold these camshafts in place, because you don't want them rotating, because if they rotate while you're tightening up the camshaft phasers, you can have some valve to piston interference and touching in the engine, which could cause some problems. I like to lay out all the parts on a piece of cardboard or on the floor or whatever, and I'll put them on, each side of the engine, sort of lay it out as it would be on the engine. That way you can see where the parts are that you took off, where do they go, whether it's left or right side of the engine. And also, as you go putting back the new parts in place of them, you can remove these off of your floor or off of your piece of cardboard here, and that way eventually you'll know that you've gotten through all the parts that you need to replace. On the front of the timing cover, where the crank snout comes through, and the harmonic balancer comes through, you have this seal. And if you're doing this with a high mileage vehicle, that seal may be a little worn out. It's a place where you get a lot of leaks of oil. And so it's a good idea while you're here to go ahead and remove that seal. And, sometimes it's hard to find the right seal driver to put a seal back in. Well, in this case, the old seal that you pull out is the perfect size to sit right on top of the new seal and be used to drive the new seal home. And since these seals have like a little flap on the front of them that can be damaged or torn if you use like a socket or something else like that, using the old seal actually protects that flap, because the old seal is tall enough to sort of absorb that flap as well. One of the most annoying things about this job is that the timing cover is not held on with a gasket, but it's glued in place with RTV silicone. So you got to get the old silicone or RTV off of the timing cover and off of the engine. And I've tried it a ton of different ways. And the one that I found is the easiest way is to get a brass wire brush like this, chalk it up in your drill, and buzz off all of the old RTV. Man, this works slick. Use a little bit of brake clean if you want to, but it's really not necessary. It'll just bust it right off of there. And that brass is soft enough that it's not going to mar or cause too many scratches or anything like that in the aluminum cover. In places where you might not be able to get that brass brush in and clean the RTV off, I found that using a Scotch-Brite pad, doesn't matter if it's green or red, whatever, will take that off of, especially these flat surfaces on the front of the engine where that timing cover goes and mates up to. Whether you're doing this job for the timing chain or for the water pump, it's a good idea to go ahead and replace that water pump while you're in here. Now, you can take all the bolts out around the edge of the water pump, but you don't have to worry. The water pump won't just fall off. You actually have to pry it out of its place, because it's typically just sort of stuck in there with a tight interference fit and the O-rings that hold it in place. Now, just beware that there's, even though you've drained the system, the coolant, you've drained the radiator dry, there's still a ton, a gallon or more sometimes of coolant trapped behind this water pump. And as soon as you remove that, it's going to come gushing out. So do yourself a favor and just pry the bottom of the water pump open a little bit, like I show here, and just get that to run out slowly. Now, it's going to go down and it's going to get into your oil pan, so just beware that you're going to have to drain the oil and refill the oil. And if you didn't do the oil drain before you start doing this, it may try to overflow the pan because there's so much coolant going down in there. So just beware of that. If you try to take this water pump off in one quick motion, you're going to get soaked with coolant and it's just going to make a huge mess. So here's the water pump removed, and as you can see, that pink coolant in this case will just keep running out of the engine for, it seems like forever. It's just in all the nooks and crannies in there. So if that bothers you, if you're tired of having that water running out, that coolant running out and getting in the way or dripping all over the place, what you can do is, since you got that jack underneath the engine, just jack that engine up a few notches. And what it does is it ends up tilting the engine towards the driver's side, and all of this coolant will then sort of run back into the block and not run out of these open holes anymore. A lot of people talk about all the things you got to remove in order to get the timing cover in and out of the engine bay. Some people even take apart the air conditioning hoses and things like that. That's I don't do any of that. I don't find that necessary. As you can see in this picture, there's quite a lot of room. You just got to sometimes bend the air conditioning hose over a little bit out of the way. Just be careful not to, break it or kink it or anything like that, but it'll bend out of the way just fine. And then you've got plenty of room to remove and replace the front timing cover. Even after you've got the new RTV on the timing cover and you go back in to line it up, there's plenty of room. Just take your time and you won't bump into too many of the things. And if you get a little bit of silicone on the front of one of the cam phasers or something like that, no big deal. Just wipe it off. It ain't going to hurt anything. Just make sure that it doesn't cause any breaks in the silicone bead around the edge of the cover so that it'll seal up well for you.
Here she is, all put back together. Man, that's a big job, but hopefully you learned something to save you some time. Again, some headaches in this video. Uh, if there's something I missed, something I got wrong, or something that you think you can add that would be beneficial to our community here to learn how to do this even faster or easier, please leave us a comment down below. We'd love to hear from you. If there was something that you learned, if this saved you some time or whatever, give us a note, give us some encouragement down in the comment section as well. Check the description for links to the products that you saw that I like to use to make this easier. And if you don't mind, hit that subscribe button. It really helps us to see a greater audience for those people to find us as well. So again, thanks for your time. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and God bless.